Well, welcome to Moe's Books. We are here to celebrate the latest publication from the Censored folks. For many, many years, the Censored book has been a bestseller here in Berkeley. Probably doesn't surprise you here at Moe's. So we are just thrilled every year when Mickey and Peter and Andy and everybody can come by and hang out and talk about their latest work. So let's give a real warm welcome to Mickey Huff, and he can start things off.
Thanks, everybody, and I especially want to thank my good friend, Dr. Jacob Van Vliet. Jacob and Moe's have hosted us here for a number of years for our Bay Area book release. It's an honor to be at Moe's on Telegraph. Moe's is an incredible institution. We're really happy to be here and really be part of Moe's and the history of literary culture here, sort of right in the shadow of UC Berkeley. I often suspect that many people learn more here at Moe's, hanging around on the various floors. So again, it's great to be here. And I would be remiss if I didn't note Jacob also has contributed to us over the years. He is now an internationally recognized scholar on Jacques Ellul and contributed a chapter to our book on propaganda and Jacques Ellul a number of years ago. So again, thank you, Jacob, for having us back here at Moe's. Round of applause, please, for Jacob and Moe. So this is our latest effort. We're 39 years old now, Project Censored. We were founded at Sonoma State University in 1976 by Dr. Carl Jensen, and Andy Lee Roth and I just finished this here this summer with the great team at Project Censored. And just to let you know what's changed since 1976. Well, some things have changed certainly, but we now have we've branched out from Sonoma State University. And this year we researched, validated, and vetted 203 stories. Those then get boiled down to 25 with our national judges and all the professors and students that participate. We had 191 students and 31 professors on 18 colleges and universities across the United States contribute to the book this year. So, and you're going to hear more about that tonight, a part of our affiliates program and a joint project called the Global Critical Media Literacy Project. So Project Censored has taken on really a lot since Carl Jensen started the project in 1976. And I wanted to start by saying a couple things about Carl. Carl passed away this past spring. He was 85 years old. He started the project in 76, carried it on until 96 when he handed it over to Dr. Peter Phillips, and Dr. Peter Phillips is here. He'll be talking about his research tonight as well. But Carl was a consummate optimist, and he was quite a visionary, and he was really thrilled as we took on more campuses. We had an award-winning documentary film. We have a weekly radio show that's now on 30 stations, the Project Censored show on KPFA Friday afternoons. So we've really kind of went in multiple directions, and Carl thought that was exactly the natural trajectory of the project. And since I just mentioned the radio show, I need to thank Anthony Fest, who's sitting back there, our producer, who comes out every week and helps us not only put together a show for KPFA, but he also helps edit and do our show for a national audience. So I want to take this opportunity to thank him for that work. Carl Jensen wrote that when I started the Project Censored in 1976, I developed an alternative definition of censorship. Rather than starting with the source of censorship as traditionally defined with the obligation of an elite to protect the masses, again, he's talking about a sort of top-down state kind of model for censorship. Carl wanted to look at the other way around. His definition of censorship started at the other end with the failure of information to reach people. And for the purposes of the project, censorship is defined as the suppression of information, whether purposeful or not, by any method, including bias, omission, underreporting, self-censorship, anything that prevents the public from fully knowing what's happening in the world. And our definition of censorship nearly 40 years later is basically that censorship is anything that interferes with the free flow of information in a society that purports to have a free press structure or a free speech or free expression protection. And we have one in the United States under the First Amendment. And so our definition of censorship isn't just what we learned from WikiLeaks right? Where we know that the government suppresses information, but it's spin, it's framing, it's slighting of content. It's so many different things that we see. And we talk about that in the book every year. Not only do we talk about the top 25 stories, right, that are seriously underreported or censored in various ways, but we also talk about the phenomenon that Carl Jensen framed as junk food news, right? You know, how we deflate gate, the Kardashians, it's the ubiquitous information that is all over the airwaves that we need to know nothing about. But yet we find ourselves sort of walking around in a daze, and then in the back of our heads there's this thing that just keeps going on, right? And it's not just junk food news, it's also news abuse, right? Which is propaganda or spin. Like last year, in fact, when I was here at Moe's last year, we ripped on that never-ending saga of Ebola, right? Remember that? How it was all Ebola all the time until the midterm elections were over and only 4 people were infected in the United States, and then Ebola evaporated, right? So we see this relentless barrage of propaganda and distraction. So we still do that, and that's still part of what we do in the book every year. And we, again, I mentioned how many students work with us on campuses across the U.S., and that's again a big part of what we do is media education, media literacy, critical thinking skills as an outreach, right? And we think that is a very important part of education, and it's a really important component of civic participation. So the project in so many ways really works toward that end. So that said, let me give you a quick itinerary of the evening. We have a number of fantastic speakers and contributors to the book this year. I'm going to call up here in a moment Dr. Andy Lee Roth, who's our associate director and co-editor with me. Andy and I have done a number of books together, and I think they keep getting. I think they keep just expanding and growing in so many different directions and different ways that we don't always know. And Seven Stories Press, our publishers in New York, have been pretty supportive of the work that we continue to do every year. I also am going to call up a Berkeley native here, Berkeley resident, that has for years very generously contributed his amazing work, his acerbic visual commentary, and that's the great Khalil Bendib. Khalil continues to contribute his cartoons to our work, and it's great every spring. Andy and I will be talking about stories, and we get a hold of Khalil, and we just say, wow, what do you know? The stories we're researching happen to be the same things that you're writing, that you're doing your work on all the time. And so it's just such a natural kind of symbiotic mix, and we're really fortunate to be working with Khalil Bendib, and he's here tonight to talk to us as well. We have Dr. Susan Rahman here from College of Marin and Tara Drabji. They did a fantastic chapter in our book this year. Susan works with us as an affiliate professor, and many of her students are here tonight to talk about the deja vu research, what's happened to previously censored stories. But she and Tara also worked together this year on an amazing chapter on women, really the oppression of women and the plight of women, particularly in Kashmir and Palestine. And the both of them have done such amazing work on this. We've had them on the Project Censored show. So they're going to talk about that. And then Susan's going to have some of her students come up and talk about the research that they've done over the years, which is, again, fantastic work. Dr. Peter Phillips, the president of the Media Freedom Foundation, will be here to talk about his recent work. Over the last several years, Peter's work hasn't only dealt with media censorship, but he's also done a lot on police accountability, police brutality, and particularly he's returned to a lot of his power elite research on the transnational capitalist class. And his current work is on private military companies and private mercenary armies, really. And this goes way beyond Blackwater. Many people in the room may have heard of Blackwater. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg here. And so Peter's work has really kind of exposed what we're looking at and what William Robinson has in fact called like a 21st century fascism. So Peter's going to talk about his work. Nolan Higdon, another affiliate of ours, he has helped us pioneer and push forward a new joint effort with the Action Coalition for Media Education and Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. It's the first program in the country, it's a graduate program on media literacy and digital culture. And Nolan is helping us move forward in this relationship with these organizations on something called the Global Critical Media Literacy Project, where it really takes a lot of the mission of the project but focuses on really the educational component. right? A lot of people over the years that know about Project Censored affiliate us with the top 25 stories or certain topics or subjects, right? But at the core of all of it, and the reason behind all of it, is education, right? That's really the reason that we do these things. So Nolan's going to talk about that. He has some of his students here this evening that'll come up. Ken Burrows, longtime supporter and friend of ours at San Francisco State University, is here. He's going to talk about the amazing work that his students do at San Francisco State University. And if I forgot somebody, we will make sure that you come up here and have a say. I think what you're getting here is, what I'm trying to get across is Project Censored is a really big family. It's not just one person or two people or a few of us. There are so many people that work and contribute and support Project Censored, and really such a diversity and wealth of people that are really interested in media democracy and are really interested in social justice, and they're really interested in making the world a better place. Not just for us now, but we work with a lot of students, and so it's for the next generation of people, right? And I think that's really fabulous, and it's an honor for me to be the third director of Project Censored. I certainly thank Peter Phillips, the Board of Media Freedom, and everyone I work with for the opportunity and honor to do that. It's really a privileged position, and that certainly hasn't been lost on me. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here this evening, and with that, I would like to call up my good friend and our Associate Director, Dr. Andy Lee Roth. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see such a warm and vibrant audience tonight. I want to extend thanks to Moe's for hosting us here yet again this year. This is a fantastic venue for us, and I think lots of resonances between what happens here at Moe's and what we do at Project Censored. Here's a riddle for you from the introduction to this year's top 25 story list. The quote I'm going to read you is from a prominent media scholar, and I want you to think about, as I'm reading it, what's the organization that the quote describes? The entity we're talking about has, quote, an agility, scope, and diversity of sources and pathways that allow it to, quote, collect and capture information on a global scale that would be impossible from any single traditional organization to replicate by itself, end of quote. Now, if you're familiar with this year's top 25 story list, you may already be jumping to conclusions. Some of our stories this year, for instance, include story number 18 on ICReach, the NSA's secret search engine. Number 20, the FBI seeks backdoors in new communications technology. And number 24, the National Security Association's Aurora Gold program hacks cell phones around the world. With that in mind, you might well conclude that the organization that's capable of collecting and capturing information on a global scale with an agility, scope, and diversity of sources unmatched by any single organization would be none other than the United States National Security Association, or National Security Agency. That would be a reasonable conclusion. The description fits in many ways. But the NSA, or any of its US governmental counterparts, are not the only reasonable response to my riddle for you tonight. No, the entity that media scholar Yochai Benkler had in mind, the one that's more agile and has a greater scope than any traditional organization that we could speak of, is what Benkler has called the networked fourth estate. And he uses that term specifically, the networked fourth estate, to distinguish a diverse and more organizationally decentralized version of journalism than we know from the past history of the United States. The networked fourth estate has emerged to challenge the traditional top-down, centralized, and elite-controlled model of journalism that's most familiar to many of us in the room. So it's true that the so-called legacy media, think of the major networks and cable stations, for instance, will continue to reach mass audiences moving forward into the next decade ahead of us. But the networked fourth estate offers, as Mickey and I have written in the introduction to the book, an affirmative way forward as the crisis of corporate news continues. The networked fourth estate departs radically from the traditional model of corporate journalism. That model is premised on the idea of elite sources, so sources of news and information who are primarily themselves elites, It departs from the model of corporate sponsorship, and it departs in radical ways from the idea that the audience for that news is a mass audience. Indeed, in our current digital era, I think the very idea of a mass media may no longer make sense. It may not really speak to what's true about the period we're living in now. So what at first sounds like an ominous threat, this entity that is more diverse and agile and comprehensive than anything we've ever previously known, it sounds at first perhaps like an ominous threat, another challenge that requires us to muster what little resources we have to counter it in defense, is actually a marker of what I think of as our strength. As Project Censored has sought to model over the last decade or more, it's possible for ordinary people to participate in and thereby add strength to what we're coming to recognize as this networked fourth estate. As many here tonight know and appreciate, each year Project Censored's Campus Affiliates program coordinates the efforts of hundreds of college and university students from across the country, and in many cases around the world, in an effort electronically networked to raise public understanding of the limitations of corporate news coverage and to instill an appreciation of the importance of a truly independent press. The fruits of those efforts are evident in the hundreds, and literally those are 200 to 300 a year, hundreds of validated independent news stories that we, Project Censored, publish on our website annually, some of which become the top 25 stories in our annual book. The students' work contributing to the research and validation of those stories, both online and in print, brings increased attention that's often international in scope to crucial independent news stories that the corporate media either ignore or cover only partially, in both senses of that term. Partial meaning incomplete, and partial also meaning biased or slanted. These students and faculty, a number of whom you're going to hear from tonight, contribute to what Binkler has described as the network's fourth estate's agility, scope, and diversity. As I've written in a chapter included in a new book, Media Education for a Digital Generation, which is edited by our colleagues at Acme, Julie Frechette and Rob Williams, Project Censored's Campus Affiliates program can be understood as one networked effort to break the corporate frame that does so much, first, to distort what passes as news in our country, and second, that contributes to the mesmerizing of our fellow citizens and community members through that, quote, news. In the introduction to this year's book, Mickey and I go so far as to predict that this networked fourth estate may provide one basis for believing that we may witness a new era of networked muckraking. We chose that term muckraking very carefully. I believe that muckraking was probably Carl Jensen, Project Censored's founder, probably his favorite term as an honorific to describe the most high quality and best investigative reporting. So Carl reclaimed muckraking and muckraker, which had been used originally as degradatory terms, as critiques. Carl reclaimed those as honorifics. That was the highest recommendation you could get. If Carl called you a muckraker, you were doing some serious reporting. Earlier than many media scholars or professionals, both, and Carl had experience and expertise in both those areas, as himself a news reporter and editor, not to mention a professor. Carl saw changes taking place in the field of journalism and in the society as a whole that he thought, that led him to predict that there might be an end to muckraking in our time, that we wouldn't see that kind of high quality investigative reporting any longer. We miss Carl Jensen tonight, and I think every day since he passed away earlier this year. But I believe that so much of his spirit, and maybe even more strongly, the free press ideals that he dedicated his life and through his teaching to championing live on today in what I'm coming more and more to think of as this networked fourth estate that I'm proud to assert Project Censored is part of. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the publication of Censored 2016 and for helping to usher in what I believe is going to be this new era of networked muckraking. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andy. In our dedication to for the book this year, we wrote about Carl. Here he is with his Sonoma State University sweater on, sitting in front of the Redwood Cafe in Cotati, where we've had so many meetings. It said, a self-described optimist by birth and tireless champion for the bonds between freedom of expression and democracy, Carl Jensen promoted critical media literacy and the training of ethical journalists as ways to cultivate, and these are his words, more muckrakers and fewer buckrakers. Ooh. And so, yeah, Carl was onto something, and actually he said that 20 years ago. He taught investigative journalism as a way to solve social problems and improve people's lives, and as Andy just said, we really proudly carry on that tradition with so many wonderful students and faculty, and it's an honor to do that. The foreword this year was written by none other than Nicholas Johnson, whom Carl invited on board to be one of the first judges, the national judges. You know, Noam Chomsky, Michael Parenti, Howard Zinn. We've had a lot of people contribute as national judges to select the stories over the years. Nicholas Johnson is a former FCC commissioner, for those of you that don't remember who he was. And I just wanted to point out that over a decade ago, media scholar Robert McChesney, he recalled a point of insight of Johnson's regarding why the state of journalism ought to be everyone's concern, noting that corporate news media are set up to maximize profit for a relative handful of large companies. Right now, 6 corporations control about 90% of that media in the United States. Just up the street here, where Ben Bigdickian used to be dean of the journalism school in the early 80s, he warned us in Media Monopoly in 1982 when there were 50 companies that controlled the media that we were headed for trouble. Look where we are now, right? We've entered trouble and then some. Well, Johnson actually then, and this is McChesney saying, McChesney writes about Nicholas Johnson, the system works very well for the owners of media. But it's a disaster for the communication needs of a healthy and self-governing society. So if we want to change the content and logic of the media, we have to change the system. And as former Federal Communications Commissioner Nicholas Johnson likes to put it, whatever your first issue of concern, media had better be your second, because without change in the media, progress in your primary area is far less likely. And that was in a book called Second Priorities. And that's one of the big messages that we at Project Censored carry forward. Again, it was an honor to have Nicholas Johnson write the foreword for us this year. We certainly invite you to check out that contribution. Well, speaking of contributions, I'd like to bring up the person that's been doing these great editorial cartoons for us for a number of years now. And in fact, Khalil Bendib not only lends his rapier wit, his acerbic commentary, to the key issues of our day. He actually also does, and I don't know if you can see this so well, but he actually does an original cartoon for us now every year. And this one is struggling to shove the genie back in the bottle. You know, we got a hold of Khalil earlier in the spring and we said, you know, we're coming up on the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. There's a few key important issues associated with the Magna Carta, particularly due process, right? Habeas corpus. And so he came up with this image about this, that all these different sources of power in our culture, whether it's Wall Street, the White House, corporate media, corporate America, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they're all trying to get the genie back in the bottle, right? So the message is that as humans, we have really generated a lot of fantastic and wonderful ideas over the centuries. And the powers that be, the plutocracy that are really anti-democratic operators, they struggle daily to shove those principles back in the bottle. And a big part of what we do at the project, and a major obligation of the free press, is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the way that it doesn't happen is by reporting on those things so that the people know and they can fight and struggle against that. So I'd like to now bring up Khalil Bendib, and he's going to talk a little bit about his work. So please welcome Khalil.
Thank you, Mickey. It's great to be here tonight, even though I'm a little bit under the weather. I didn't come as the president of the fest.
No.
I just came as an anonymous, low-profile cartoonist. So no, no fireworks, no big media outside the door. How did I become involved with Project Censored? Let's start with that question. A few years ago, I had the good fortune of being invited by Peter Phillips to Katari, to the university. So I think that was my first contact, direct contact. And then I kept getting invited more for some reason. Santa Cruz, we did a great thing there, and then Sebastopol. I keep getting these invitations. And at some point, I just took one look at this guy, Mickey Huff, and I thought, wait a minute, am I being recruited by the greatest, coolest rock and roll band ever, ZZ Top? I was just so excited. I used to be a musician myself, so I started wondering, where's my pair of cheap sunglasses? I was really excited. Then I found I was not all about music, but even though PC really rocks, I must give you that. Project Censored rocks, and it tends to march to its own drum, so I like that. Yeah, there's that musical element to it. How did they know that I had my own band when I was a kid in Algiers? I had a band sometimes we called it the Beagles, so it tells you which kind of bands we were inspired by, the two bands there. The Rolling Bones sometimes. But finally landed here in Berkeley. You're right, I am a Berkeley native. I've been here more than 5 years, so that makes me a native in California. What I always liked about PC, but I call it PC and no Project Censored, is that for 40 years it's been tirelessly ringing this inconvenient bell. Chuck Berry, the father of rock and roll in my book, had this great song called Johnny Be Good, where he said Johnny used to play the guitar like ringing a bell. And that, to me, is the metaphor for Project Censored, ringing that bell of inconvenient truth, really kind of spoiling that beautiful unison harmony that the media, the mass media, always singing together, the siren song, they're religiously singing together, that false note. Well, Project Censored comes up with a dissonant touch, and it brings this different voice, many different voices that really need to be heard. That's what's so exciting about Project. First time I heard about it, actually, I was in San Bernardino, and the only corporate job I ever had. Nobody's perfect. I was corporate for 7, 8 years. That was my first job right after university. Nobody's perfect. I worked for the Gannett newspapers. They recruited me at the San Bernardino Sun. Of all places, was their flagship newspaper in California. So for a while I was trying that, not having much. I did last 8 years, but it was at the cost. That's where I encountered censorship. Not the first time. The first time was in Algeria. I can tell you that story briefly, but it was the second time that I encountered censorship in a big way, even though they didn't call it censorship. And it was, I had started with this editor who recruited me for some reason to do cartoons for the newspaper. And at some point, at first he said, just fire away, Ben. It was too difficult to call me Khalil, so they called me Ben, Bendy. So fire away, Ben, whatever comes in, go ahead. So when he found out that meant, especially when it came to Palestinian cartoons, they would just get lost. The cartoons just started getting lost, until one day he fessed up to me, he said, Ben, I'm glued, the advertisers coming, I'm glued, man, I'm glued. One guy called me and said, the owner of the shopping mall across the street, he called me and said, that Sunday ad, that big fat, nice Sunday ad, you can kiss it goodbye if you keep doing cartoons like that. So I found out very quickly the meaning of free press and our media. And I sort of somewhat adjusted, did fewer Palestine-related cartoons, but even then, you know, if you do something that's not perfectly in line with the corporate agenda, you run in trouble. You do stuff on NRA. So gradually, I kind of lost faith. They started playing my cartoons smaller and smaller, and playing other cartoons who are not from the newspaper against my cartoon to let the world know that this guy's crazy. You know, it's not our fault. Comes up with these crazy ideas. I had a good editor, but the publisher was not supportive. The publisher really was going to fire me if I didn't. I actually quit before I was fired. I was also a sculptor, so I thought, hey, I'll be a sculptor. But what happened is that the internet was there by 1995, and it really rescued me. I didn't know there was a pent-up demand for the kind of cartoons I was doing, because nobody else was daring to do them, period. Whether it be in the environment, corporate stuff, military-industrial complex. I was the only one who was freely doing these because I was no longer gainfully employed. And that was a niche right there I didn't know existed. So the internet literally saved my career. So that was a happy thing for me. But the first time I encountered censorship was in my native country of Algeria. And I was 15 years old and starting to cartoon. And a friend of mine who's a poet also wrote these beautiful things. And we went to the editor of the established National Weekly back then. This was probably in the mid-70s, early 70s. I was 15 years old. And so I submitted 5 comic strips, most of them sort of vaguely, you know, they're just socially oriented, not necessarily politically, but one of them kind of very mildly criticized the government, indirectly. The guy just paled. He said, you want to have me shot? I mean, I'm not going to run this one. So that was quite edifying for me at age 15 to run into the big C. Censorship, it's everywhere. Not just in the third world, it's here as well. And what the question I most often get from the press, because even though I am being censored by the press, by the mass media, they don't like my take on things, they come to me periodically whenever something happens, like Charlie Hebdo in Paris, and they know I was born in Paris, I speak French, I know those people who got shot. So they find me irresistible every 2-3 years. There's, you know, TV channels lining up at the house. All of a sudden, you know, it's like feast or famine. They want to know what I have to say. What did I draw on this? What do I have to say? So, so this whole thing, is really interesting how they censor you, and it goes beyond censorship. We talk a lot about censorship, the C word, which I'm glad, Mickey, you gave a very full definition for. It's more complex, more interesting than meets the eye. But to me, in this country, what I've encountered, what most of my friends have encountered, people I agree with politically have encountered, it's not just simply censorship, it's actually blacklisting. Because if they don't like you, if they don't like one thing that you say, let's say the Middle East, in my case, it's not as if they will avoid your Middle East cartoons. They will avoid you, period. They try to starve you. They use those purse strings to actually try, just like they did in the 50s, famously, people know it, but it's still going on. They try to economically ruin you. You can't work in a newspaper. Ralph Nader, I'll take one example, a guy I know and respect, and he was prominently in last year's edition of the Project Censored book. I remember when I was in San Bernardino County, the San Bernardino County Sun, which was a Republican newspaper, they used to run Ralph every week, column left, column right. That was a column right, but that was a column left. And he got to say his stuff, and I was really amazed there was somebody in America saying these things. Now that sounds like science fiction looking back 30 years. How could that be? They would let Ralph Nader actually poison the people's minds? It doesn't happen anymore. And if it's Ralph Nader, they don't want it, period. If they might say he's got 1% of the vote, 1.5%, the horse race thing, but they will never let you know what Ralph has to say. So it's beyond censorship, it's actually blacklisting. They try these things, but I think how am I doing on time? I think I have another second. But just to give you more of my background, I was born during the War of Independence, the very violent war against France in Algeria, and almost not born for that reason. So that made me a very politicized person. It's what early on, I mean, in my mother's womb, I knew that if you don't care about politics, politics cares about you. Because I was almost dead for that reason, almost not born. And I don't mean abortion, I mean they were coming to kill both my parents, and I was inside my mother, just as retaliation for what was happening back then. So that's the question I most often get from the press. You know, how did you become a cartoonist? As if you become a cartoonist like you become a dentist. You know, you get your license to practice. No, the first drawings I ever remember drawing, I was 3 years old, were drawings of an Algerian soldier saluting the banned Algerian flag. So I guess I was already a political cartoonist back then. And now I'm still doing it, and I'm doing for fantastic projects like the Project Censored, and every year it's one of the highlights in my year to be doing this little fun collaboration with Mickey and Peter and Andy. So that's the whole story in a nutshell, and how come I get to do the cartoons for Project Censored. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Khalil. It's certainly an honor to work with you every year, and we certainly urge people to pick up the book and leaf through it and look at the great work that Khalil offers to us. And also bendeeb.com is your website, so people can go there and learn more. You know, Khalil brought up Ralph Nader, who did the foreword for our 2015 book, last year. And it's interesting, since we're seemingly forever in an election cycle, right? It just seems to never end. Well, Ralph actually wrote about that in his book. He says he's talking about the culture of self-censorship, and saying that the inhibitions operate in the campaign trails for presidential and congressional candidates. Establishment reporters wallow in a rut of self-restraint or boredom and wait for gaffes. Even when third-party candidates or citizens point out crucial questions that should be asked, including why candidates unreasonably restrict access by reporters, right? Why so many people are excluded from debates, these kind of things. Well, Ralph Nader actually asked the Washington Post editor, Fred Hyatt, this is back when Ralph was running in 2008, about his ongoing campaign and why the Washington Post wouldn't cover it. He said he campaigned in Washington, he highlighted the city's pressing issues, and other major candidates weren't even touching them. And Fred Hyatt blurted out, quote, "Because you can't win." And Nader replied, "Well, then why are you covering daily the Washington Nationals baseball team, which wasn't winning many games?" And Hyatt smiled. And when the media accept the game as two major parties, one it played, whole segments of society's needs are blacked out from ever being discussed. And at the project, one of our goals is to make sure those ideas are discussed and people do hear more about them. So our next speaker is the president of the Media Freedom Foundation and former director of Project Censored, also co-host with me of the Project Censored show on KPFA Pacifica Radio. His recent work is a continuation of his longtime interest in the power elite. This chapter is called 21st Century Fascism, Private Military Companies in Service to the Transnational Capitalist Class. And it's an incredibly detailed accounting of not just the 1%. Our top story this year was an Oxfam report on how the 1% control over half of the world's wealth, right? So they have more wealth than half the world put together. But Peter writes about the 0.0001%, the actual, the supreme power elite and the military powers that they are amassing to control and subdue populations and resources around the world, and of course offer ways of how we can address that and counter that. So please welcome Dr. Peter Phillips.
Thank you very much. We all know pretty much that the 1% controls half the wealth in the world. That's like over $100 trillion. But inside of that, the continued globalization of trade and central banking has propelled private corporations to positions of power and control never before seen in human history. The few thousand people controlling global capital amount to less than 1,000th of 1%. They are the transnational capitalist class, who as the capitalist elite of the world, they dominate nation states through international treaty arrangements, transnational state organizations like the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, International Monetary Fund, now TPP is approaching. These transnational class communicates their policies through networks like the G7 and the G20 and the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberger Group. They represent the interests of the top 1%, which comprises hundreds of thousands of millionaires and billionaires who put their money in these investment banks and these big corporations or investments in stocks and arranged deals. The TCC are keenly aware of their elite status. Those few thousand people, they know who they are. And the military empire, dominated by the US and NATO, with 1,000 bases worldwide, is there to service and support investor access to natural resources and speculative advantage in the marketplace worldwide. That's what the military is doing. It's protecting this transnational capitalist class. Now, they're keenly aware of this, and if in crises where desperate masses of refugees, alienated workforces, or there's civil unrest, the empire is quick to be there and repress it. Estimates are that over 200 billion now is spent on private security, employing 15 million people worldwide. These are the private security companies, or the private military companies, many of which got their start in Iraq under US capital, but have now expanded globally. The largest is G4S. It's based in Great Britain. It has 625,000 employees, spanning 5 continents and 120 countries. Of the top 13 money management firms in the world, BlackRock with $3.5 trillion, Barclays with $3 trillion, 9 of them are invested in G4S. They're everywhere. Some of the most important contractors are the US government, the UK, Israel, Australia. They work with corporations like Chrysler, Apple, and Bank of America. Chevron contracts them in Nigeria for counterinsurgency operations and fast mercenary responses. They do similar operations in the South Sudan, and they provide security surveillance for checkpoints and prisons in Israel, and security for Jewish settlements in Palestine. That's G4S. Another big one that we know about, of course, was Blackwater, but Blackwater is now under a group called Castellus Holdings, which was a merger of Blackwater and Triple Canopy. They were the leading providers of security support the military, the US government in the Iraq War, but they also work for other governments, multinational corporations, international organizations. They are managed by an all-male board of directors, including Red McCombs, multi-billionaire, former Attorney General John Ashcroft, retired Admiral Bobby Emmon, and a former advisor to Clinton, Jack Quinn. There's hundreds of private military contractors now playing an important role in transnational class security. They protect their families, they protect zones of employment, they protect their corporations. They will do security work, they will acquire weapons, they will do intelligence on democracy movements and counter movements, and they will go kill people. There's no question about it. And we think about this in terms of moral legitimacy. The US is out droning people to death. 90% who are civilians. The newspapers cover it as if they're, insurgents. Thousands dying. That lacks complete moral legitimacy. There's nothing to think that private military companies following this model in service of transnational capitalist class won't be worse. And they are worse. So, if we think as this being out there in the third world, in the deserts somewhere, we have to really think about what that means, because that capital is here as well. And as we evolve, as we recognize that and we start to challenge that, these private mercenary firms are going to be available. And Blackwater, of course, was used in Katrina to protect the wealthiest, to protect their empires of wealth, to protect their buildings. And it becomes literally the 21st century fascism, kind of a new neo-feudal approach to how the world is run. So I think it's very important that we're aware of that we know that that's the direction we're moving, and that we do everything we possibly can to stand on human rights and scream and yell and assert every right we have to try to stop that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Up next, I'd like to bring two other contributors to the book, and these are both serial offenders, right? They've been contributing to Project Censored for some time in various ways. Dr. Susan Rahman, she's a professor at College of Marin, and she works with a lot of students there that do work with us at the project. But she also does a lot of work on Palestine. And she worked this year also with Tara Drabji, who's a writer, arts educator, radio journalist at KPFA. And they put together a chapter called Existence is Resistance, Women in Occupied Palestine and Kashmir. And they're going to come up and they're going to talk about the important research that they did. And I also want to point out, as somebody that is a parent myself, and married to another radical mother. They're both radical moms, and they're both making the world a better place in a lot of different ways. And I want to bring them up, and please give them a really warm welcome.
I want to thank Peter and Mickey and Andy all for having our contribution, and particularly Mickey. I have to say, whenever I have a super censored story, I'll be like, hey Mickey, and he'll be like, oh yeah. So that's been a real unique relationship over the years, and really appreciate Project Censored for that as well. Ditto. And this work really came out of Project Censored in many ways. I think we met here, right?
Right.
So it was 3 years back?
How quickly we age. How quickly we age.
Yeah,
Right?
it
probably was about 3 years back.
Yeah, and Susan and I met here, and I had just returned from doing field research in Kashmir, and Susan was thinking about or planning a trip to Palestine
Yeah.
at that time. And both of us were really interested in the effects of occupation on women.
Yeah, so basically, we've both done different bits of research, but the reason I took a special interest in this is because I'm Palestinian and I didn't know my homeland. And it was really, really important for me to make that journey. Really quickly before we go on, I just want to say that my two cousins that I met for the first time in Palestine are here tonight, and they're both here doing different things, pursuing careers and pursuing education. But I'm really touched that they're here. It's like, I didn't even know that, I mean, I invited them and they said they would come, but I'm very touched and I'm very honored that they're here. And the work I did for Palestine is for my family also, besides just all the people of Palestine. So it means so much to me that you guys are here, and I'm just so happy that you're here. And everybody else, I'm really happy that you're here too.
And I think, what Susan and I do and did is relatively simple. We go and we sit with women. Sometimes we drink tea and we listen. And we ask questions about their life. A lot of times there were tears. Kashmir is the most densely militarized land on earth. So most of the women that I talked to had lost a family member to the occupation in one form or another, whether it be that their husband or father was disappeared, whether their son was gunned down by the military, whether they had a brother in prison. They were all touched in a deep way by the occupation. And I think what really, it's not so surprising, but it's very deep, is how much these stories are censored and how much backlash there is against having these women's stories heard. And I mean, even when I landed in Kashmir, it was like within the first day, the head of surveillance made his presence known to me. I was meeting a friend at a coffee shop, and he was just like, oh yeah, mentioned to my friend, there's your friend from California. So it was subtle, but very real, that by being there and by listening to the stories of women, and also, some of the men too, that we were considered a threat to the occupation.
Yeah. Just getting off the plane in Tel Aviv and having the security gentleman comment on my name, first of all, and wondering what I was doing there, and saying to me, no, you've been here before. You've been here before. I know you've been here before. Rahman, where are you from? Where are you from? And I just kept saying, I'm here to visit family. I'm here on vacation. I'm here to visit family. And all the while I was like, please don't look at my computer. Please don't look at my computer. And I made it through security, and I was sure that guy was going to chase me down. But luckily I got in. But the minute they're suspicious of you because you're telling a story that they don't want you to tell, is what it basically boils down to.
And I think for both Palestine and Kashmir, the stories of the women are a direct threat to the story of U.S. global hegemony in very different ways. And if you look at the rise of U.S. hegemony post-World II, the establishment of the State of Israel, the occupation of Palestine, there is a narrative need to suppress the occupation. And likewise, with the story of India as the quote-unquote biggest democracy in the world, and it's sold sort of as a pushback on colonization, right? There's the whole narrative about Gandhi, and that is what is in the forefront, and it really builds a sense of global hegemony, and it's built by stopping and oppressing the voices of these women. And it became very clear to me as we did this research, and I think that this is really a beginning. We put the stories together in sort of a dialogue, so we go back and forth and we weave them together. But what became really apparent to me is that colonization is about killing culture. That's what it's about. And women are the culture bearers. Women raise the children. Women are the story keepers. And so the very act of being a mother, the very act of preserving the language, of cooking a meal, the very act of remembering who is buried and keeping those stories alive are living acts of resistance. And so by elevating those stories, it's a very direct and very serious and very fierce threat and pushback against colonization. And I think particularly in Palestine, there was some incredible stories as well that Susan really brought out.
Yeah. You can't listen to the stories and not be moved. You can't listen to what life is like for people living under occupation and not be crazily disappointed. I don't even think that's the right way to explain it. But you couldn't possibly understand, oh, you can't hear me? You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to go through life going in and out of checkpoints and being restricted in your movement and what roads you can drive on. And day-to-day stuff is just really annoying, but add that on top of everything else you all do on a daily level and just find yourself, it just adds up. It's death of a thousand paper cuts, right, that expression. So I loved talking to the women because the women were like, yeah, this is really bad, but guess what? We're not gonna ever stop fighting. And passing on culture is really important, teaching them how to cook, teaching them about the history, making sure that they know the history. Because one thing that we know for sure in Israel and Palestine is that the textbooks are getting written so that Palestine is getting erased, right? I mean, it's getting erased off maps, all sorts of things. My cousin was a teacher during when the Israeli government closed the schools in the West Bank. For a year, she ended up teaching kids at what we call popular schools, and she would get them all caught up. And so one of the things that they did was they would come to people's houses and they would just keep them pursuing their studies, so that when they did open the schools again, they were able to go back and enter into the next grade. You know, education is a huge form of resistance in terms of Palestinian strength. You know, people are so educated, people are going to school, people are learning, people are not deterred by the occupation. And the education is not just about education in terms of like a math degree or whatever, but it's also knowing the culture and knowing your history and knowing about resistance, right? So nonviolent resistance is a huge part of how kids learn. They learn different, you know, it's like learning on the street, so they grow up learning that this is what you do, it's part of life. It was so funny, my dissertation question was, why do you resist, right? That was a really naive question, because of course everybody resists. Would you not resist? Imagine if you were being restricted every single movement, all sorts of, I mean, you can't not resist. You can't just take it. It's not possible. So resistance is weaved into every part of their lives, whether it's through art, whether it's through teaching, whether it's through protests, you know, but the resistance is just part of what it means to be Palestinian.
And I think one of my favorite stories from Susan's research was a woman, and her husband was in jail as a political prisoner, and she realized that by the time that he got out, she would be 50, and they already had one child together, but she wanted more. And so she actually smuggled his sperm from behind bars and became inseminated and had a young boy. And so that, and she said really in her interview with Susan very specifically, I did this as a form of resistance. This is my resistance. And so the very act of bringing life, which is in itself a huge act that women do, you can see how the occupation does that. And you know, it's in both Kashmir and Palestine, they're deep occupations. It's not just the physical border points, it's the constant surveillance, it's into the psyche and into the culture. And so the types of resistance are very deep as well, and very personal in terms of having your own ability to make choices for your family just being threatened by the occupation. And so, you know, it's been a gift to be able to amplify the voices of these women, and also to begin a conversation about two different communities under occupation, and what are some similarities, what are some differences, what are we seeing in these women as commonalities. And it's also, you know, been really exciting to have our partnership develop, and you know, it's starting to grow. So we have an article actually that, you know, started its roots in this work that'll be in Al Jazeera this week coming up. So, you know, just really want to thank Project Censored for being an incubator, not only in uncovering the most censored stories, but being a place where new relationships can be forged, and we can take our research to new levels all over the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of it too and supporting the project. And I think our article is really good. So yeah, I suggest you get the book and read it. The whole book is really good. But if you want to learn more, you can also find us after, and I'd be happy to talk to you about my research, because that was part of my point, was that I wanted to tell the world what I saw, and maybe we could change it, right? That's the point. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, he's trying to get rid of me, but I'm not leaving. So I'm gonna change hats now, okay? So now I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher at College of Marin, and one of the things I do as a teacher is Project Censored, clearly. I work on top 25 most censored stories with my students, and I write the chapter on the déjà vu. So tonight, I have 3 students with me who want to come up and talk to you about what they learned doing this work, and what kind of the project has done for them in terms of like uncovering media, what's being told, what's not being told, those kinds of things. So Maya, Lauren, and Katie, would you please join me up on stage, and let's clap for them. They'll be right here. Oh, here's Lauren. Would you like to begin? So Lauren's story is she found one of the top 25 stories. So I would tell you to refer to your book, but you don't have books in front of you. So top 25, her story is number 10. So she's going to tell you quickly about it, and then these guys are going to talk about deja vu. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, everyone at Mo's and Project Censored. So I was once upon a time, last semester, a student in Susan's sociology class, and I don't know, I've been learning a lot in college, media literacy being one thing. So she actually made this an assignment for us, and I kind of just turned it in as an assignment and, kind of forgot about it or whatever. But then she was like, hey, you actually, did really well. And so anyway, so now I'm here tonight, and I'm super excited and grateful. And so my story was about Costa Rica and some things they've been doing for sustainability. So for the first 75 days of the year of 2015, they ran completely on renewable energy, and they didn't bring any fossil fuels. And then it also goes on to say other places around the world that are also using sustainable energy. And yeah, it was a really great experience to be a part of this. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. She left me, so she went to Chico State now, so I don't get to see her anymore. But that's part of what it, almost like mothering, right? You work with them and then they go out in the world. Let's have Katie come next. Katie did a deja vu. So deja vu stories were the ones where we look at the top 25 from the year before and see what has changed, what hasn't changed. Has it become actually something that is now in corporate media? Because what we find is there's often a lag between when Project Censored covers a story and then when it gets out into the corporate media, if it ever gets out. So the deja vu chapter always looks at about 5 or 6 stories and then kind of sees, okay, well, so what's been going on with those? So in the social problems class that I teach, the students do groups. So they work in groups and they kind of just do a lot of fact finding. What's been talked about? What's going on? So Katie's going to talk about the story that she's going to tell you the name of because it's out of my head right this second. Here comes Katie.
Hi. Here we go. I'm Katie. So I was part of Susan's social deviance class. I myself am a sociology major, and the So the topic that I chose, or that Susan picked, actually was overcrowded prisons. You kind of picked it. I kind of picked it. But so I remember in the beginning of class, Susan was like, if you have a social problem or social issue I started the class having no idea what I was passionate about. And then ending this class and doing this article, I actually am now pursuing to be a probation officer for this. I found out that California is actually the #1 leading in lifers for prison. I think they have 40,000 lifers in prison. I had the option but I had the acquaintance of interviewing a prison guard from St. Quentin over in Larkspur, and he told us that they are so overcrowded that their prisoners are sleeping in basketball courts. There's not enough beds, and that in each tier there's 180 inmates per one prison guard. So from his personal experience, he's scared for his life. He doesn't know. He can't see around the beds because all they're doing is, stacking beds up. Instead of double beds, there's triple beds now. And so last November in 2014, they passed Prop 47, which kind of lowers the misdemeanors down for drug abuse. That doesn't mean they necessarily can get out of prison. They have to sign a petition to the court to request to get out of prison. But I also found out that the governor's proposed sending plan for 2014 and 15, California is expected to spend more than $62,000 on each prison inmate Meanwhile, our state is expected to spend slightly less than $9,200 for K-12 students in 2014. So, yeah, that's my issue. And so they're slowly but surely trying to fix the issue, but they're not spending enough time on it. They're not making it a number one priority where they should be. So that's my pick. Thank you.
Yeah, we spend a lot more money on prisoners than we do on students in this state. That's pretty gross, right? Okay, Maya. Maya is another one that left me, but she's also a deja vuer, and she's going to talk about the Ukraine. So Maya is now at San Francisco State studying social psychology, but always a Project Censored lover.
Oh, yes.
Come on out.
Hi, good evening. My name is Maya, and I got into the deja vu portion of Project Censored through Susan's class last semester, but originally I got involved with Project Censored a year ago. A whole year ago. At Copperfield Books in Petaluma. And I went in because Susan said that foremost it was an extra credit opportunity, but I wanted to go solely out of my own ambitions. And I fell in love. I fell in love with how important this vision is and how speaking out against all this commotion that's going on in the world and how speaking is so important and how this vision that Project Censored has created is so important. And I was so incredibly moved by the first time that I heard Mickey talking about this and seeing Susan about this whole picture that they're painting, and I just wanted to be so involved with it. And I immediately, after they started talking, I immediately was like, what can I do? And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of silly. I know what I need to do. I need to be an activist. I need to get involved. I need to write about this stuff. And so then that's when they gave me this project about deja vu, and I feel like I definitely took the bull by the horns on this story, because the way the media describes the hypocrisy of the United States and how they depict Russia's involvement with Ukraine is just so simplistic and it's so black and white. But what I've read over the months of reading all these articles and actually not even finding anything in English, I actually had to look at Russian documents and like decode it because there was nothing on about it. I had to, it was a mess. I remember going to Susan and having like a stack of papers like this big. I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out like what happened like in the Cold War and how we've progressed with everything. And the thing that I came back from it was that everything is interlaced. Like the whole relationship, especially the international relationship between the United States and Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan now, it's all just this giant big bubble that hopefully won't burst into this extraordinarily problem. Hopefully we can figure it out as a collective group. But it was definitely a big commitment to try to figure out what exactly happened and how we can learn from it and what we can do to progress into the future as people that know what's going on and how we can help. Thank you.
So this project is just really amazing for students. I just want to say that really quickly. The way that they get to work with media and have this sort of service learning experience in which they're looking at something that any of us would look at, and then kind of taking it into a classroom project. And so I couldn't be happier being a part of this program. It's been a really life-changing thing for me as far as my teaching and just my awareness, because they bring me stories all the time. I couldn't possibly read all the things on my own, so it's just fabulous that they provide me with all this news. They keep me on my toes, so it's very nice. So I love Project Censored. Yay! Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Tara, and thanks to all of your wonderful students that continue to work with us every year. The next person I want to bring up has been working with the project for quite a while in a variety of guises. Nolan Higdon now works with us at the project as an affiliate professor. He's also working on a joint endeavor between the Action Coalition of Media Education, Sacred Heart University in Connecticut, their program in media literacy and digital culture. He contributed a couple chapters to this year's book. One that he did with me, with Ellie Kim, with a whole number of other students, some of whom are going to come up here in a moment. On the junk food news chapter, we riffed this past year on something called a vast wasteland, going back to FCC Commissioner Newton Minow, talking about how TV was a vast wasteland of content. Not that it had to be, but it was mostly a tool of propaganda and distraction. And he also contributed with both Julie Frechette and Rob Williams a vision for transformative civic engagement, the Global Critical Media Literacy Project. So I want to welcome Nolan Higdon up here. He's going to talk about that work. And I also have to say that Nolan is another example of someone that was my student over 10 years ago, and now works with us as a professor, as a researcher, as a contributor. He works with us on the Project Censored show, and it's just another reason why it's an honor to work with Project Censored with so many great young people that, as young people do, they grow up, and they go on to do some really great things. So I'm really proud of Nolan, and it's a great honor to introduce him to you this evening.
I bring an entourage, I always do. I love it. Yeah, my name's Nolan Higdon, and as Mickey said, I was a former student, turned faculty affiliate for the project, and now I'm working as the coordinator for the Global Critical Media Literacy Project, which I'll talk to you about tonight. The idea behind the GCMLP, which is chapter 5 of the new book, is getting organizations, students, faculty, and institutions together to do two things, really. One, teach students a new way to conceptualize media, teach them to be media literate, to understand the dangers and possibilities of media. And secondly, to recreate our media structure. For decades, if you look back at what people have been writing about and activists have been talking about, they've been complaining about the state of the media, and rightfully so. But what we're trying to do with the Global Critical Media Literacy Project is put an opportunity in students' hands to reconceptualize media, to create a new media structure, a new way to inform themselves and inform others. And the key part of that is having students be in control of it. We want students' interests to be represented in the types of stories that are reported. We want students to be engaged with the materials. We want them to feel empowered. We want them to be civically engaged, be a part of the process with a social justice agenda. And we hope that their commitments to things like equity and diversity will remake our media structure to really change the way people look at our society and understand what is possible. The project gave me an opportunity to really understand the problems with media. Project Censored, I've always called it a solution in itself. I mean, Carl came up with a solution. He realized certain stories weren't getting out. The project was a solution. What we're looking now to do is to put that on a much bigger scale, to do what the project's already doing and put it on a global scale, and basically put it in the hands of the next generation. And as an educator, that's key. It's fun to sell the invisible product that you're the future of the world and we promise you'll get a job and all these things. But it's something much more meaningful to set up a structure and a pathway for students to succeed and make meaningful change in the world. So the concept behind the Global Critical Media Literacy Project is to give students the power to recreate this world, to recreate the way we think about this world. And I say it every year, but it's totally true. My favorite part of the job is getting to introduce my students. It's why I do what I do. I was a student one time and faculty took an interest in me. Like Andy, Mickey, and Peter, and hundreds of other educators helped me work on my research skills, writing skills, public speaking skills, and I think the right thing to do when you graduate is to go back out and do that for the next generation of students. That's really what it means to be a really educator who cares about the students. So to be able to stand up here with these students is amazing. And so tonight I have sort of two groups of students you're going to hear from. You're going to hear from the newcomers. These are the rookies, people who just got involved. They're wondering, why did I do this? Why am I standing in front of people? And then we have the veterans. These people, they could give a speech and write anything in their sleep. So it's kind of an interesting contrast, and I hope you'll enjoy hearing from them tonight.
Hello, I'm Haley, and I can definitely call myself a somewhat reformed conservative. I was very shocked when he asked me to do this, just because I was very almost willfully disillusioning myself from what I should know and what the media is trying to tell me. And so through Project Censored and then through Nolan, I realized that once I did open myself up, there was a lot of things that I could know and that it was important for me to know. So right now I am, right now I'm doing a vid on Reykjavik's decision to boycott Israel due to their discrimination of the Palestinian people, and then listening to Dr. Susan and then her associate earlier today just brought back at home how important it is that it did not end with Operation Protective Edge, and that discrimination continues and continues, and only through an act such as Reykjavik's, even though they're a small country, they can make a big difference, and then through that decision they have led many other countries, many other organizations to also fight back. And that's my little spiel.
Hi, I'm Cyrus. I'm a student at Los Angeles College, and Professor Nolan actually sprung this up on me to actually work on.
I put it down for her, but I'll put it up here. Yeah.
To work on the independent study along with VIN Project Censored. And the VIN I'm actually working on right now is from the study of one of the guest speakers here today. It was Dr. Peter Phillips, and his study was on the Bohemian Club and about the social inequality and the untold conversations that actually happen within the club. And as an individual, I'm pretty happy about being a part of this because it brings up the stories that you don't see in public and mainly in corporate coverage, and it's brought to light. And I do enjoy working on this, and hopefully in the future I could learn more about it. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Davis. I am an intern. I am a veteran intern. I guess veteran equates to 1 year now, but I've been interning with Project Censored for 1 year. I initially was introduced to the project by Nolan Higdon, and I met Mickey after that, and definitely felt I found a place to have a voice to talk about things that have been bothering me for quite a while, especially pertaining to media and race and intersectionality. And I was blessed enough or lucky enough to come into the project during a time when Nolan and Mickey had an idea to put this Women in the Media article together. It's this huge article that we wrote. Myself and Darian and 3 other women who aren't here right now, they've transferred to other schools that are not local, but so we wrote this article. Overarching theme was the male gaze in media, and each of us had a very specific topic that we addressed in that article, and mine was women of color in the media and how the media skews the narratives that surround women of color, whether it's pertaining to women of color victims or in the entertainment industry, how women of color are projected through what we have identified as the male gaze. Which is the fact that the media is dominated by men. I specifically became concerned with the fact that the media is dominated by white males, where the 6 corporations that run 90% of the media are run by white men. And so that broke my heart, actually, and bothered me to the point where I needed to do research about it and wanted to sort of elaborate on that and the consequences of that and why we have such a biased media when it pertains to the view of women of color. So that's primarily what I've worked on with Project Censored. Tonight, actually, at dinner, Mickey was discussing with us, Darian and I, the idea of maybe doing a show on KPFA discussing our research with the article and maybe having like question and answers and a forum to sort of discuss what we've researched. And hopefully the other women that wrote with us would be able to get in on that, and you can check that out and hear not only my opinions about like media and women of color, but like issues of feminism and sexual assault, which Darian will cover, and like women in politics. It's just a very broad article, and it covers a variety of different issues with feminism in the media. So yeah, I hope to continue to be a veteran with Project Censored and maybe participate in radio and write another article in the future. And I'm very grateful that I've met Nolan and Mickey. So thank you so much for coming out.
Hi, my name is Darian. I met Mickey and Nolan about 2 years ago at Dabble Valley College, and now I go to UC Berkeley.
And I focused particularly on two main stories last year. The first story was with Lisa and three other lovely ladies. We focused on the portrayal of women in the media, and specifically I focused on sexual assault and rape on college campuses and in the military. Right now, currently 1 in 5 women on college campuses are victims of sexual assault and rape, and in the military it's about 1 in 3. Wow. And what we see in the media is not only just sexist and patriotic coverage, but also racist coverage is what I like to focus on. In particular, the media will cover certain aspects that are just not important, such as appearance and the way they look, and things that are just almost not only censored, but just are not accurate at all. And this also perpetuates the culture which we live in, that people will deem as a culture of rape, and that is a culture of not just rape, but the society where women are demonized. For the story about Ebola, it was kind of the same aspect in a way, just how they would focus on the coverage of America and focus it here when really it wasn't, we weren't really threatened by it here. So yeah, I hope to continue my research here and other places as well, and focus on international human rights for women, not just in America, but abroad. And yeah, thank you.
Give him a big round of applause. You can tell why I love what I do. I look forward to talking to all of you. I really appreciate the opportunity of being here. Most books, for me, is just a great staple of keeping Berkeley living up to its commitment to free speech. So I'm honored to be here, honored to have my students. Thank you all very much for coming out.
Make it this evening, but there again you can see we work with a lot of really wonderful young people, both students and faculty alike. And we're only scratching the surface on what's in the book this year, so please feel free to pick up a copy, even if you just sort of glance through it. There's a lot of things that we do. What we want to do now is we want to bring up, I believe it's our final speaker. Let me see if I'm scanning the room. Yes. Last but certainly not least, it is our good friend, Ken Burrows. And Ken Burrows runs the Holistic Health Center at San Francisco State University. I've had the good pleasure of going to San Francisco State University as Ken's guest over the years. And you look around here and you see so many great books. And I feel similarly when I walk into the library that Ken has built over there over the years. It's just a really phenomenal place. Just when you're in Ken's classrooms and you're working with the students Ken has, you can really tell the excitement, the exuberance, the effort that he really puts into it, and the students really respond. So many wonderful students from San Francisco State that we've worked with over the years, and we're grateful to Ken Burrows for helping us connect with all those people. So Ken, as usual, his students have stories in the top 25, and Ken also over the years has been someone that has really helped spin some of the stories that we do, or the way we select some of the stories to focus on. It's not just negative stories that get censored and sort of corrupt things that get covered from the public. It's also very positive things or community-oriented things that are prevented from getting through to the public airwaves. And Ken has really been great at pushing those kind of stories, and his students, once again this year, have put forward several of those. And so please welcome Ken Burrows to talk about some of these things.
Hi everybody, good to see you all. It's Saturday night. What are we doing here? Talking about these issues. Well, of course we're here because it's important. My students, we often try to take a different track. We recognize that most of what appears in the news is actually about human failure. It's about fraud, and murder, and war, and so on, right? When you pick up news in a newspaper, it's about, oh my gosh, look at this, and then look at that. So that needs to be in the paper. We're very clear about that. We need to warn ourselves of those amongst us that are doing things that we should feel are hazardous, right? And it used to be, though, that in fact when there was a town crier going through the town crier didn't have any weapons, nor were they needing weapons. They would simply say, it's okay, stay asleep, or it's really not, come out and help, right? That was what the purpose of a crier, and they would run out with whatever weapons they had to take care of the business of the community. But lacking community, we're more or less left to ourselves, right? So we tend to focus on systems understanding of things. So we try to really reflect that in the writing we have and the stories we pick and the dialogues we have amongst ourselves. And systems thinking has to do with the interrelationships of things. It's about seeing through the detailed complexity and also seeing the arising story out of that complexity that often is being missed, right? And also it helps us understand how our mental and social structures, the ones not being seen, are typically those that are controlling us. So how do we reveal those hidden structures, mental and social, that really are part of controlling our everyday behavior without us maybe even recognizing it? So we start with that track. And this year we had 4 stories that made the top 25. It's, by the way, our lowest story count in our 6 years of submitting stories. And we focused in part on water this year. We thought that water would be an important issue. We felt it already was by the time the stories were being researched. And so we focused on 5 to 6 different water stories. And I thought I'd share a few of those with you tonight in my piece of the evening. And just to frame this, I know you know that water's an issue, but 2 billion people in more than 40 countries live in regions where clean and safe water are scarce right now. And the UN predicts by the year 2030 that 47% of our global population will be living in areas of high water stress. 47%, 1 in 2 of us. And that water scarcity is perhaps the most underestimated resource issue facing our world today. So we thought we'd really look at water as a core factor in our story writing and our research. And so they came back with all sorts of stories. Let me share a few of them with you. One of these that did make it into the top 25 was about the water wars of today, about recognizing the new water barons. And I don't mean just ranchers or in the battle between urbanites and ranchers, but I mean really Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citigroup, the Carlyle Group. These are all special interests that are buying up water rights, recognizing the scarcity. So they're treating water as a commodity, and they're wanting to own it and charge us for it. So given that this corporate agenda is like a snake actually coiled, ready to make trillions off of our thirst, we decided there are 2 things that we could focus on that people could do. One, instead of fighting over the limited water, like groundwater as an example, and trillions are being pumped from the Central Valley Aquifer this year to feed us, aware of that or not. But we can also look at supporting programs that increase the water supply, right? So there's one thing we can clearly do. And then also effective water management. And after much research looking at all these stories, we decided that it isn't really so much that we don't have enough water, it's that we're not managing the water we have, right? So we hear there's a drought, well, which is true. Let's look at a case in point. Let's look at Los Angeles. 85% of the water that Los Angeles, and this is in the book, 85% of the water that Los Angeles receives comes from the north. Yet LA does not save a single drop of rainwater. Last year they had 13 inches of rainwater land on LA, and you think, well, that isn't much. Well, it is. Had that water been saved, that would be 6,000 gallons per resident in Los Angeles. If that water was collected, not that it runs off now right to the ocean, it's gone, it's totally wasted. It's also polluted water, right? It runs through streets and picks up all sorts of pollutants, and it does hazard by the time it reaches the... If we collected it on site and saved that water, 6,000 gallons per resident in LA. And that would be much less water needing to come from the north, right? But if they don't have to worry about that, they don't. Well, there's a group down there, tree people, that are working very hard to help LA shift its thinking. Also, by the way, there are over 180 cases where water has been returned to public control, where it's been privatized in over 35 countries. 180 cases have returned that water to the public issuance when it has been grabbed. Back to LA though, one more thought about LA. Adelaide, which is a city similar to weather conditions as Los Angeles. Now half of those homes have government-sponsored cisterns in them that collect water. So after 12 years of drought, Adelaide is collecting their own water. We could be doing the same here, and certainly Los Angeles could be doing this, but there needs to be a citizen awareness program, as they do have in Adelaide, for the government to get behind this, right? So again, making this news that there really are, it isn't just a drought and it's a terrible year and we have people fighting over water, we can begin to really rethink water. So another way to rethink water, I found this pretty interesting. Just make this into a fun invention. One of our stories was about an Austrian designer who made a water bottle. It's called the self-filling water bottle. So you put this on a bike, you buy this particular device, you put it on a bicycle, and you pedal for about an hour, and the water bottle is full. It creates the water from it condenses the moisture in the air and creates water for you when you arrive at your destination. So, and that self-filling water bottle is something you can purchase right now that's built off a technology that's thousands of years old, comes out of Asia, water condensation. Fog blankets is one of the ways to collect water. You just hang out a fog blanket, you let the water drip, you go out in the morning, you collect the water, you go in and drink it. So we need to find ways, again, to increase our own water supply. The water's all around us. We breathe it. It's part of everyday life. Another story, I found this one quite interesting. Our top story last year in Project Censored was the acidification of the oceans. Very top story. So we did a story on how to de-acidify water, including the oceans. We, by the way, this one did not make it in the top 25. Just curious, given that last year it wasn't the top story. For 20 years, researchers have noted how the winds have changed, and the winds used to carry sand, which is laden with all sorts of minerals, including iron, over the oceans. They used to seed the oceans with this iron-laden dust. And that iron and that mineral content would feed the plankton in the ocean, and the plankton would become food for the fish, and there would be this cycle of completion. But now with global warming going on and climate change, the winds have changed, and there's much less water, much less wind carrying those sand particles into the ocean. So part of it is not just human sewage, and certainly there's the plastic, so on. We've done stories on that as well. But it's and human pollution. But how do we? There's a whole CO2 sequestering efficiency that comes with the phytoplankton as well. So the very act of global warming and the climate change is part of shifting out of this cycle. And these plankton that soak up carbon dioxide. So there's now a program of possible iron enrichment that has been talked about for many years. And this last year there were a couple big experiments doing that. And one was quite illegal, by the way. It was the dumping of this iron compound in the ocean, and people didn't like that we're dumping anything into the oceans. But what happened, as viewed by aerial satellites, was this huge explosion of the microplankton. And with that, record salmon catches, reverse of alkalinity in the water, and all sorts of things. I find it interesting that this is something that we're not talking about very actively. With the oceans in such great peril, we can help revitalize coral reefs, the dead zones in the sea. There are over 55 dead zones where now life does not live any longer, fish colonies, and so on. And just that one example is a pretty interesting one. This last one I'll finish. It's a controversial story for some. I find it interesting that it is, because this is about water in the Earth's mantle. After decades of theorizing and searching, this year the U.S. array of hundreds of seismographs located throughout the United States gave data to a series of scientists that pronounced in a series of articles that there's a massive, massive amount of fresh water down underneath the Earth. In fact, it's 3 to 5 times the water in our oceans. Many are speculating that's where our oceans come from. And immediately you might be saying, but we don't want to tap that, we'll contaminate that as well, some of you might say. At least the breadth of the water supply is so huge that at least we have some as needed, but it's a long ways down there. And however, there are people actually tapping that mantle water. It's forced up to geological activity, and it can be actually seen from the changes in the topography And there are people actually drilling wells throughout Africa and Pennsylvania and some parts of California. In fact, they predicted, a man has been drilling these, he calls them primary water wells, that there could be wells dug in California for the cost of $800 million, less than 2% of the cost of the Delta water tunnel to provide perhaps water for all of California. At least it's worth talking about, right? It's worth discussing, at least that as a possibility. So we focus a lot on solution-based journalism in our thinking. How do we think about a world that is not shy of solutions? And how do we think about adding some of those? And I don't know about you, but just maybe to close, thinking about a thought about human nature. I teach a class about holistic health, human nature, and global perspectives. I used to work for a congressman in Washington, and I saw things when I was there that scared me, that I didn't quite understand, and I had to think about them for many years, and think about them differently so I could be not just a problem seer, but really a problem solver. And that's what I try to do in at least in my classes. Evolutionary history has given us two pictures of human nature pretty clearly. We can be quite competitive and selfish and cruel and brutish, but we can also, if you look back at our over 2,000 years of human experience, we tend to live in close communities. We tend to thrive as tribal people. We tend to really be a rare one of 7 species on the planet that, when on a good day, we can collaborate really well and actually create a sense of not only community, but division of labor and abundance is really the norm for us when we get it together. So I have great hopes for humanity. We perhaps have the solutions we need. We just lack somehow, I think it's the imagination and leadership that we need. And we can provide some of that, both of those to some degree. Certainly the imagination and maybe help our leaders step forward and do the right thing. I have a great faith in human nature if we can actually see what's going on. Family therapists say we're as sick as our secrets, right? So we can start talking about these secrets. Project Censored is very good at that, but I think we also need to start talking about what we can do to make a world that's safer, better, wiser, and healthier. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to conclude the program here this evening. We want to open it up to Q&A and discussion. If there's anything you want to talk about or comment, discuss with us, we're open to do that. Also like to thank, once again, reminder to thank Mo's Books. The best way you can thank Mo's Books, other than a handshake and a waving as you leave the door, is to tell all your friends that independent bookstores are still alive and well in Berkeley, and Mo's really contributes a lot to this community. Amazon doesn't host any authors. Amazon doesn't really put anything into the local community, and Mo's certainly does. So I just wanted to once again thank everybody at Mo's and my good friend Jacob Van Vliet for having Project Censored here once again this year. So over the past years, Project Censored's worked with some pretty interesting artists. Our 2014 cover was Marcia Annenberg. It was a really fabulous cover on sort of a veil and sort of how the flag was used as a ribbon to pull back the veil to the news. Last year, Josh McPhee from Just Seeds had a great cover with the light bulb and pulling and turning on the light bulb. This year, we worked with Hillary Allison, who's associate of our great editor, Veronica Liu at 7 Stories Press. And she came up with this cover for us. And again, we were riffing on the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. And we were sort of talking, one of the things we do at the project is we have like the sort of the critical and the affirmative. And Andy and I have sort of riffed on those kind of things for the last several books. And here, the subtitle of the book this year is Media Freedom on the Line. And of course, that's both a warning and a call to action. As a warning, it points, as we wrote in the introduction, a warning, it points to the ongoing crisis of journalism in which the future of a free press is now at stake. It's also a call to action because it suggests runners at the start of a foot race, towing the line, ready to run with determination, endurance, and skill. A foot race need not pit its participants against one another. In fact, the Latin root for competition means to seek with others. In fact, and Andy, who's a long-distance runner of a long time, contributed that to the introduction, and it really makes a lot of sense. in terms of what we're talking about here in the book this year. So Hillary Allison's cover image, of course, it has this on the line, right? And you can see the Magna Carta, the Constitution. I mean, it's and the press, the media, the news sort of hung out to dry, right? Like, what are we doing with it? We can't just leave it out here. We have to engage it. We have to somehow, breathe it to life. These are living documents. They're not just abstract concepts. Democracy is a verb, right? This kind of a thing. So this is not just a negative interpretation, as we write here in the introduction. An affirmative interpretation of the cover is that it challenges to consider a robust free press as one of the pillars. See here, the pillars, right? It's one of the pillars that provides crucial support for other vital social institutions and values. And in this view, a free press is one of the pillars that holds up and supports what's on the line, including the U.S. Constitution, the Venerable Magna Carta. The affirmative view aligns with the understanding championed by Project Censored's founder, Carl Jensen, and others, that media freedom is the most valuable in support of broader rights, including especially the fundamental right to freedom of expression, which is protected not just in the U.S. Constitution, but it's also reiterated in the UN, the Declaration of Human Rights in Article 19. It's very important. We just celebrated the 70th anniversary of the UN here this past week, and this is certainly one of the principles that's in it. We can, of course, criticize these institutions for their shortcomings, their failures, or their potential role even in hegemonic control. But we also need to note that these other ideas are there. They're there. And they don't just enforce themselves. We have to make them come to life. We have to breathe them to life. Well, coming back here over 20 years ago, Carl Jensen stressed the mutual dependence among these pillars in our society and how we sort of bring about the best in what we have to offer. And he wrote, "The press has the power to stimulate people to clean up the environment, to prevent nuclear proliferation, to force corrupt politicians out of office, to reduce poverty, to provide quality health care for all people, to create a truly equitable society, and as we have seen, to literally save the lives of millions of people." He was specifically referring to Ethiopia a number of years ago, but again, Carl was really a consummate optimist. I mentioned that earlier. This is why we must look to, prod, and support a free, open, and aggressive press. We have a free press in the United States guaranteed by the First Amendment, and we have the best communications technologies in the world. Now let us see a more responsible and responsive free press, a press that earns First Amendment rights. Indeed, a press not afraid to do a little muckraking. Then and only then will we have the information we need to build a more enlightened and responsive society. And the biggest way we can do that is by being the media and turning off corporate media, understanding the deep state controls and machinations behind media, right? That we know are not just part of boardrooms, it's also part of the Central Intelligence Agency, the deep state, the national security state. And we need to not only unmask those things and understand how top-down propaganda aims to control public opinion, but we need to contribute to the narrative and tell our own stories, because the stories that are peddled from those media are not ours. And so I think this is also something that Ken was alluding to about the solutions journalism and about telling our own stories and telling the stories that we need to tell each other to bolster a better, a brighter, and a more productive future for everybody. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming out this evening. Again, it's an honor to work with everybody here, and again, thanks for coming out, and I'd like to hear if you have any comments or questions for us at this time. So thanks very much. Andy? Anybody, questions, comments? Yes, sir. Arnie.
So is there a solution to Fukushima?
It's interesting you mentioned that. We're doing another show on Fukushima in 2 weeks. I've lost track how many shows Peter and I have done on Fukushima since March 2011. We've certainly covered Fukushima stories in the book almost, I think, every year since. And in fact, this year, I believe it's story number five. The deepening disaster of Fukushima. Of course, this is such a big issue and big question. The first and foremost thing that you could say is there's no such thing as safe, clean nuclear power, and there needs to be movements to just stop this. Unfortunately, we're seeing the proliferation of nuclear power plants being built, like the opposite of this. And in Japan, they're now starting up nuclear power plants again. They're building new power plants in China. Yeah, it's kind of madness given what we've seen over the decades. Certainly in Fukushima specifically, we really need to see a global international scientific response that contains what's there. But this is cleanup, right? This is kind of like after the fact cleaning up something that, can't exactly be cleaned up. And I think that part of what Peter and I do on a lot of our shows is we keep reiterating the message that nuclear power is not something that we should be doing. We should be sinking our time, our effort into renewable energies. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's been a chore. And one of the reasons we've seen that just this past week is that Exxon, we recently learned that not only do they have front groups denying things like global warming, but back in 1978, their own internal scientists told them that they were contributing to climate change, and they decided to do nothing about it. I mean, so, you know, that's really a challenging, you know, kind of a problem, Ken.
Yeah, just a thought related, just a related thought is, but not just about the thing in Fukushima, we might want to look at the techno optimism that we have running our culture. We really believe in technology to such a great extent, we're not talking about the dark side of technology, including the cell phones we're using or anything else. So we might want to have a broader conversation that would be not just about Fukushima, but technology itself.
Yeah. And those stories have been in the book for the past several years, and you've contributed some of those in particular, and they're very important things. And in Berkeley here, they just recently won a case to put warnings on cell phones. Once again, this is kind of Band-Aid on something, right? But these are steps in a direction that's looking to warn people that in our technocratic culture, technology is not merely a savior, it's also a contributor to the challenges we face.
Are you interviewing Arnie Gunderson?
Yes, we are.
20?
We are.
Well, Arnie's going to be in Berkeley on the 22nd.
And he's gonna be in Sonoma County on the 18th. Yeah, so Arnie's gonna be in town and doing several events.
Who has questions about Fukushima, listen to the show on the 20th and also come to Berkeley Fellowship if you're in Berkeley or Sonoma State on the 18th.
I think it's the 18th, yeah. Larry.
Hi, I have a comment and also a question. Have an ingrained frustration and negativity that's been developing inside of me for years and years about the lack of the alternative media to be able to make any kind of inroads into the corporate media structure. There are a lot of people, a lot of great journalists and investigative journalists that are doing great podcasts, and like Peter B. Collins, for instance, and other people, Project Censored. But it's very difficult for those of us who are listeners to be able to sustain them with a $50 a year, contribution. And I would like to be able to support them. But more than that, I would like to see some of the journalists that are doing Project Censored, and also journalists that are doing podcasts and trying to get the word out, and they can't get the word out. And what can we do if like someone like myself who's on a fixed income, who can't give money to podcasters and who have no real connections to get the work of these journalists out to a larger public, what can be done to make some inroads into the mainstream corporate media culture, so at least these perspectives can get out there so that people have an opportunity to at least see what you all are doing, and they can make a critical choice if they want to. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a crucial strategic question for us to address. A whole host of thoughts come to mind in response to your comments and observations, Larry. One is, in terms of Project Censored's mission, from the start, it has been to try to provide a more prominent platform for exactly that kind of independent investigative reporting. So Project Censored, its very reason to exist is, I think, speaking to your question. Second, even in its heading into its 40th year, Project Censored is not so robust financially that we would be able to say to you that, oh, well, some of those smaller donations don't make a difference for what we're able to do. I would say to anyone out there, even on the most modest of means, what might seem like a very small, even inconsequential donation to you might be enormous to the people, the reporters, or the organizations that you're talking about. And again, that comes from direct experience of my own working with Project Censored since 2007. The third is, I think, money doesn't have to enter the equation. Money isn't the only version of speech, despite Citizens United, Supreme Court decision. I think simply talking to your friends and your colleagues about what you're learning in the independent press and how that compares to what you would know if you relied exclusively on the corporate media is a kind of a simple, direct experiment that anyone can run for themselves. I challenge my students in my introduction to sociology classes to say, look, you don't have to take my word for it. All I would ask you do is spend 2 weeks, whatever are your normal media sources for news and public affairs information, pick a handful of independent media outlets and look at them and compare what you're getting. And at the end of the 2 weeks, if you followed that at all systematically, you could come to your own conclusions about where you're best served, where your interests are best met. We write in the concluding section of the chapter 1 on the top 25 stories this year, one of the components of that concluding chapter is, how often does news provide us not only what we need to know, but guidelines to how we might become more involved? And I think your question goes to that issue. And one answer to that, I think, is that more often than not, simply being informed and talking about it with your friends and your colleagues and your family, you'll come up with ways to be involved and supportive. You know, it's not, in some ways, for us as director or associate director to say, but I will come back to, you know, what might seem like a small, oh, this couldn't matter to an organization like Project Censored, or this couldn't matter to a reporter whose work I admire. The answer is probably it will. And you know, those our $5 a month subscribers sustain us. So that's huge too. That's not the only thing, but that is big, and don't underestimate that aspect of it.
And just sharing the fact that the project exists. It never ceases to amaze me that despite the fact that we're nearing our 40th year, we run into people, or you know, we're working on this sort of cooperative project with Acme and others, and some people are, you know, going out and talking to pretty big foundations and others, and they go and talk about Project Censored, and people don't know. They just, what do you mean? What is Project Censored? So maybe we take it for granted, maybe some people in the Bay Area take it for granted, or people that pay attention to media literacy might know about that, but share that information with your friends, with your family. Show them a book, show them our film. Mo's doesn't have the film, but I have our award-winning DVD film here, if anybody's interested in getting a copy. Those are the ways that we really help raise consciousness. We can't assume that other people know what we know or care about what we know. We really have to make the effort of communicating. We have to make the effort of talking to them and really raising these key issues with them, however potentially unpopular. And Lord knows that some of the things we discuss are not always popular with a lot of people, but that shouldn't dictate, you know, whether or not we bring them up. And that's why we're big supporters of free speech. That's why we're big supporters of things like Banned Books Week, belong to the National Coalition Against Censorship. You know, we work on this issue across the board. You know, we don't just do it, you know, in the book every year. We do it every day of the year. And the people that we work with, you know, that's what they live and breathe too. And so, you know, if you want to do that kind of thing with us, or, you know, live and breathe that way, then spread the word. Share the news of what groups and people are doing to make us more media literate, more aware, and have a better, more open society in terms of speech and expression.
Maybe one more question and then.
Yes.
Someone might have said it earlier, but who picks the top 25 stories that are put together?
Thanks, Gabriel. That's a great question. So the top 25, the selection of the top 25 is really a year-long process, and as we describe in a note on the research in the book, by the time the stories make it into the book as among the top 25, they've undergone 5 rounds of critical review and vetting. Along the way, the actual voting process involves both all the students and faculty who submit stories. In the spring of every year, we send out a ballot with the 200 to 300 some stories that have been under review that year. And faculty and students at all of our campus affiliates across the country and in Canada and sometimes around the world vote on those. We narrow that pool of, say, 250 to 300 stories down to about 30. Those stories go to our panel of international judges Mickey mentioned earlier, the foreword this year is by Nicholas Johnson, one of our judges who's been with the project since it was founded in 1976. And the international panel of judges, all of whom are, we have brief bios of them towards the back of the book, they do the actual voting to rank order the top 25 stories. So that process is part of when I was talking about the kind of a networked fourth estate. That one of the ways that Project Censored, I think, qualifies for inclusion there is that it's a decentralized project. We are getting input from people all over the country and indeed around the world on the stories. Ken mentioned some of the fantastic stories from his students at San Francisco State that didn't make it into the top 25, but all those stories are archived online on our website, and so you can go look back and you can type in on the search window for our website whatever topic might be of interest to you. Chances are somewhere in the last 12 months we've reviewed some very high quality independent news coverage of that topic, and you know, we can only fit so many. As great as our publisher 7 Stories Press out of New York is, they won't let us run a 1,000-page book. So we have to, you know, 25 is kind of a tidy, neat number. But if you go to our website where we don't have the same kind of constraints, every year we're producing validation of hundreds, literally hundreds, of independent news stories on all kinds of topics. So, but the stories that make it in here have really undergone the highest level of scrutiny, right? It's about 1 in perhaps 10 or 1 in 15 of the stories we review every year that we choose to highlight in the book. That's not to say there aren't other stories that aren't worthy of attention. You know, one of the things I appreciate about a number of great things Ken said tonight is he's highlighting some stories that didn't make the book, but are fantastic stories and truly do deserve greater attention and may well have the kinds of solutions, be pointing to the kinds of solutions that we're searching for. So yeah, thanks for your question on that. Maybe one more question and then we should, given the hour, we should perhaps go to more informal the dialogue. Yeah.
Daniel.
Yes. During the, I think you said, well, like, you've been publishing these taboo stories for about 40 years now. What kind of pressure have you gotten to tell you to just shut up?
Well,
on a daily basis.
Yeah, on a daily basis. You know, I mean, I broke new ground a couple weeks ago with hate mail from Poland. You know, it happens in all guises. There are certain stories that aren't supposed to be covered, right? And certainly we've covered a lot of the deep state kind of stories, the stories behind the stories. You know, what's behind corporate media, right? Not just sort of the media reform movement, but more radical type movement. We've gotten pushback. We've had people, you know, really, you know, try to attack us over issues. Some people like to pigeonhole us and attack us over a particular story, not realizing that that story may only be 1% of all the stories we've ever covered, right? And so, you know, we just like to remind people that, you know, we're a free press and a free speech organization. So there's a lot of irony sometimes coming from various factions who don't like that we're doing a certain thing. And we say, yeah, but, you know, we're not just an organization that's about one issue, meaning this external issue. I'm going back now to Nicholas Johnson and the second priority issue, right? Our concern is free press. Our concern is open media. So even if people want to criticize us about 9/11 or Palestine or GMOs or, you know, what have you, just say like, well, but did you see those stories anywhere? Did you see those narratives anywhere? No. You can critique and attack them all you like, but the fact that they're not covered is something that we want to point out to, we want to point attention to. So yeah, we've certainly had our detractors, and we've had you know, foundations and other groups that kind of shy away because they get worried about the association, right? But we don't retract stories really ever. We've made editorial comment when we've noted controversy or a potential dispute about a particular fact, but we stand by the stories that we vet and that we research, and I guess we just kind of take it on the chin. I mean, I guess we take the lumps. You're very familiar with what goes on inside of places like KPFA. We've certainly taken criticism for the stories we've done there, and Peter and I have just plowed on ahead. Tara Drobji and we did a show on, you know, SB 277 on vaccines. that was incredibly thoughtful. It had nothing to do with anti-vaccination, anti-science reporting. It had to do with the reality of making things mandatory and violating Roe v. Wade, right? But it's very difficult to bring that up, even in the alleged free speech liberal climates, right, and progressive climates of KPFA. Where all of a sudden people are like, you can't say that, you can't. I'm just like, well, where are we? Where are we again? The birth of the free speech movement? Yeah, so it's perplexing, but the best antidote to that is to just keep doing it, and you just do it as much as you can.
I would just add, a couple years ago, we came up with some wording that we've been publishing in every book since we came up with it. It's in our note on research and evaluation of censored news stories, and the last paragraph of that note reads, and this is directly responsive, I think, to where we stand on this. We take our lumps, as Mickey says. The last paragraph of that note says, although the stories that Project Censored brings forward may be socially and politically controversial, sometimes even psychologically challenging, we're confident that each is the result of serious journalistic effort and so deserves greater public attention. And I think one of the things that gives us confidence, me individually and us collectively, is that the students, many of whom you've heard tonight, and their faculty, mentors, and then we at kind of Project Censored, we try to research the heck out of these stories before we bring them forward, whether it's on our website or in the book. And so, yes, they are controversial, sometimes, as we say, psychologically challenging, but we don't bring forward stories that we feel are not yet factually documented to a degree that that we could say with, in all good conscience, they deserve greater public attention. And so that position hasn't always helped us financially in terms of big grants, but it's, I think, how we all look ourselves in the mirror, and to the extent that we get sleep in our busy schedules, sleep peacefully.
Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for supporting Mo's books. And if you're able to, please buy a book from Mo's and support your independent bookstore, even if it's not our own. So thanks so much for coming out. We look forward to seeing you again. And don't forget, Friday afternoon, 1 o'clock, KPFA Project Censored show. See you next time.